The sleeping giant in all of this kind of AI debate, which has been Google, has seemingly woken up.
We're moving into this next chapter where it's really a capital and infrastructure war.
This trader has made roughly $3 million on $400 million in total volume over the past year.
The funniest thing to me, for folks who've seen Succession, this is very literally like the core plot of Succession, where like an upstart tech company ends up acquiring the old incumbent. They peel away their news and journalism layer, and it becomes this big regulatory deal.
What I mean by that is people get really, really serious when you ask them to start wagering on their opinions, right?
If they cancel that or if they change their plans on that, I will lose my... I probably have to censor saying that for the sake of posting. What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Restart Pod. We've been having this conversation a lot offline between the three of us, and I think everybody's pretty interested in this whole mess of the AI ecosystem and OpenAI's Code Red and Google's Gemini crushing them and Anthropic going for an IPO. I'd like one of you, probably, let's start with Damon maybe, just to set the stage a little bit, because it's been so volatile and so like changing every couple of days. There's a lot of news there, and we can kind of break it down because I know there are a lot of opinions in this group.
Yeah, that's great. I think maybe just level setting at the kind of, maybe most superficial layer here. What has happened over the last, 12 months plus is we've seen these AI foundation labs, that includes Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, and others, spending at rates that are significantly outpacing their revenue, right? And that kind of has people speculating as to how they're actually going to hit these spend targets. We've seen kind of these circular financing deals that we've cited a couple times on this pod and elsewhere about NVIDIA investing only for that invested money to be turned back into expenditures on chips and those kind of things. And I think what this is causing for investors of all types, people, onlookers, people building in the space, kind of, all the buckets that we kind of each individually fill, is different layers of speculation for who is doing this best. Are they all playing the same game? If so, who's winning? And then the other layer I would add to this is recently, as even as recent as maybe 3 to 4 months ago, the sleeping giant in all of this kind of AI debate, which has been Google, has seemingly woken up. And this kind of has, a new player, maybe even taking pole position in kind of the space. Google's always been well positioned, right? They were the kind of the original architects of the transformer models. They published the paper, attention is all you need. Their DeepMind division has been kind of the quote unquote leader in artificial intelligence, up to maybe even including the kind of mainstream adoption of ChatGPT and some of these other tools. And so it has people, I think, underscoring the idea that we might be entering into an AI bubble. And I think that is leading to kind of speculation on all sides. And so I think just setting the stage, the most recent news, and I think the things that's most topical for this kind of conversation is the potential of Anthropic, undergoing an IPO possibly next year, what that may mean for the company and the evolving landscape. OpenAI's recent Code Red, also their kind of committed capital expenditures for NVIDIA and otherwise, and what that might mean for their fundraising efforts or kind of alternative, and then also kind of what Google means and all that. So I'll kind of pause there maybe to allow Shashi to add anything that I might have missed.
Yeah, Shashi, hit it. Do your thing.
On December 2nd, Sam Altman declared a code red and shut down ad revenue generating projects, some longer term projects, because Google Gemini 3 has outpaced them. What's happened over the last year is remarkable. A year ago, you would have looked at NVIDIA chips as the only relevant chip in the market, and you would have looked at OpenAI, ChatGPT as the only important LLM provider. What's happened today and what's really notable, especially in the stock market, is that Google stock is increasing in price rapidly because Google has a custom TPU, a TensorFlow processing unit, which is their version of the AI chip that NVIDIA produces. Google's got their own. They've had it for a long time, and they don't sell their TPUs. They keep them in-house. They use them in their Google Cloud operations. And so they've got a custom internal stack. Google also has the incredible advantage of having a 90% profit margin, essentially monopoly search business that can subsidize what they do for the long term, which we'll come back to. What's happened in the stock market is that NVIDIA has seen a chink in their armor, in a sense, because Google has the TPUs and because Gemini is performing so well that ChatGPT traffic has declined in their month-over-month usage, while Gemini, especially Gemini 3, has grown rapidly in their their usage. So Gemini's crushing it on benchmarks, they're crushing it on users, and Google's got their own TPUs. Thus, Google stock goes up. NVIDIA stock takes a little bit of a short-term hit, and OpenAI declares a code red. Meanwhile, Anthropic, the other important player in the large language model space right now, sort of joked about Sam Altman and his code red and has been positioning Opus 4.5 as the enterprise cloud alternative to the kind of panicky OpenAI competitor. So the question in our mind, in my mind, and what we've been debating on our thread privately is, can you be bullish? And Damon asked a really good question about this. Can you be bullish on Anthropic but bearish on OpenAI? I've been saying for a while, I think OpenAI is in trouble. I think they're going to die in the next few years, not in the next 12 months or 24 months, but I think eventually they're just going to be quietly folded into Microsoft, their biggest investor. And I just want to tell you my reasoning for this statement and have you push back on this reasoning. I think OpenAI doesn't have the cash flow benefit that Google has, and they don't have the profit that an enterprise-focused Anthropic has. And I think ultimately the difference in my thinking is cash. I think OpenAI just doesn't have the cash to substantiate the kind of burn they have, and Google can fund forever. Google Gemini can fund their operations forever using search revenue. They will have more than enough money to do it. In fact, Google, for a long time, they had Google X projects, and they would basically find ways to burn money so that the regulators wouldn't come after them as being like stupidly high profit. So they had to find ways to spend money for a really long time so that their profits didn't look absurdly high, so that the anti-competitive regulators wouldn't pursue them. Now Google's got a great place to put their money, which is data centers and Gemini 3 model creation. And Anthropic has a great path to cash through profit because they're selling to enterprises who are willing to pay them a ton of money. OpenAI's market share has been consumer. And ultimately, I think one of the big problems is consumer focus versus enterprise.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I kind of tried to break into a couple of perspectives. Like, there's the economic, there's the product, and then there's the scientific, kind of like lanes in which to break a lot of this down. I think I look at every one of these is pretty risky fundamentally. I think just like economics the easiest to talk about because every one of these companies has like a predictable sort of bottleneck. Like they have a compute limitation that they're trying to serve and they're trying to predict how much more compute they can get 2 years from now based on the growth that they're currently seeing, right? I was listening to Dario talking with the New York Times yesterday. I'm forgetting what the event was called, but he was going through like, they have currently seen 10x revenue growth year over year. Obviously, you can't expect 10x growth to continue permanently, but predicting that they'll need this much compute in 2 years' time. And for that, they need a data center build out that they're going to be partially investing in or working with vendors to achieve generally makes sense. The problem that you're risking is that any one of these given companies is making a guess as to how much demand that is. And then like they are all running the same sort of dangerous risk computation, right? Jumping from the economic one, the product thing is really, really interesting because I didn't have this perspective earlier about Anthropic. I always kind of treated ChatGPT as like, yeah, you own the consumer verb of LLMs. Like the average person, ChatGPT's things, they don't Claude things, they don't Gemini things. But in that risk equation of how much demand you're predicting, OpenAI out of any one of the three has the most risk of ending up out over their skis by a lot. Right? Like by a significant margin, simply because their focus is consumer. Anthropic, Gemini both do this really good thing in their product for good thing for the sake of their business, where both of them pretty severely usage limit the average person from using their thing, right? If I want to use Anthropic or use Gemini the same way I use ChatGPT, which is basically just an unlimited thinking tool, I have to hop from $20 a month. In Anthropic, I jumped to $200 a month. I have a usage-based plan with Gemini for my productive purposes, whatever it may be. And it's all in all pretty dangerous, I think, for OpenAI generally. That's not reason for me to be like fully hopeful on Anthropic and winning it all. I still think they're in a pretty risky position, but I'm a little bit more concerned about OpenAI, especially I think if they did not put out the code red saying like pull back from ads, pull back from this sort of stuff, I'd feel a little bit more normal because they're still looking at consumer profit centers, but they're like pulling away from what feels like should be their hero game against Gemini.
Yeah, I think all that makes a lot of sense. The way that I would kind of summarize my perspective on it is the advantage that Google has, Shashi, is you well articulated that, right? They have this profit center that is search. They can use that to fund all their capital expenditures, whether that be for data centers, individual chip architectures, even just burning cash to acquire consumers for their Gemini tool. The way that I see this game, I think, breaking down is you have on one hand the incumbents, which are the Googles of the world, the Metas of the world, the AWSs, all these companies that actually have kind of a sustainable business beyond the LLMs and the emergents, the OpenAI's of the world, the Anthropics of the world, the Perplexities, and all these Mistrals and other kind of foundational model labs. The areas where I would push back primarily is that I don't think OpenAI is as consumer focused as you all believe they are, or at least as you all are stating. I think their flagship product is absolutely consumer, but we've seen in the most recent months that, I mean, number one, OpenAI has investments in Harvey. They have investments in Eli Lilly and other drug discovery companies in which they're building bespoke tools directly for them on their local machines to help them enable drug discovery or kind of, AI for law, those kind of things. We've also seen OpenAI partner with Thrive Capital, who, as of earlier this year, kind of underwent this transition of model to where they've been buying businesses and trying to effectively remodel those businesses using AI first, kind of, limiting the number of headcount and trying to improve efficiencies. And OpenAI has engaged in a formal partnership with them to help them do that. And so all that to kind of say, I think that OpenAI knows what we are saying, and that consumer is not the long game. They're using consumer for mind share. It's a land, and expand strategy. And they know that kind of the ultimate game is in B2B effectively. And honestly, I think probably actually in replacing labor costs, right? The kind of total TAM of software isn't large enough to sustain the types of valuations these companies are going to have to grow into in order to justify their capital expenditures. And again, by the way, that applies to both OpenAI and to Anthropic. And so where I'm struggling to see the distinction is whatever game is available to Anthropic is also available to OpenAI, and OpenAI is in the pole position to take advantage of. The bet on Google dominating both of them makes a lot of sense to me. It's not necessarily my opinion, but that makes a lot of sense to me. I am struggling to see threading the needle between Google's going to kill emergence, except Anthropic's going to carve a narrow victory. And in my opinion, just rounding out the discussion, the IPO announcement of Anthropic is somewhat of that concession. We have seen over the last, call it decade, probably even longer than that, but call it decade, the best companies simply do not go public. Mm-hmm. The public markets have kind of acted as this adverse selection machine in which only companies that have to go public are going public, right? There are some outliers that don't fit that model, but for the most part, that's kind of been the cadence that we've seen. We've seen companies like Klarna, as an example, even pull back from going public because the reception and the regulatory burden of being public doesn't justify any of the kind of access to retail trading that you might otherwise get. Anthropic going public to me signals that they can't fundraise in the private markets to the rate they think they're going to have to in order to justify their new capital expense partnerships. OpenAI, I believe, still thinks they can fundraise in the private markets. They might fail and they might be wrong in that assumption. But if so, they'll just go public as well. So they'll tap into the same kind of pools of resources that Anthropic would or otherwise. The counterpoint that I've seen made that I think is somewhat compelling to that is Anthropic is fully B2B focused. They don't want to be burning token costs on consumers. And in being a public company, that gives them a gold star or a seal of approval for any businesses that might want to adopt their technologies. And so long as you think that's the bet, I can see that argument. The only counter argument I would make to that is Microsoft and Google have distribution in all the B2Bs. Why would you not just roll up those companies? And when I say Microsoft, I mean OpenAI, because we know that kind of worst case for OpenAI, they just get absorbed into that company. I still don't see a lane where Anthropic outcompetes OpenAI down any of those kind of proposed channels. And I'd love to explore other, things that I might be overlooking there, but that's the kind of way I see the landscape breaking down.
I feel like the startup era for these foundation models is over. I think the startup era was all about innovation, and it was an innovation race. And I think what's happening for foundation models is we're moving into this next chapter where it's really a capital and infrastructure war. And so I think the path to success now is exactly as you said, Damon, it's a capital acquisition strategy, but you also see taste. And we talked about taste last episode. You see taste and kind of implementation detail down to like font selection, user kind of the touch of the model, kind of how the model interacts with you, show up in these large language model interactions. And I think that that's starting to now become a factor. Whereas before, people would only ever try ChatGPT. I'm talking about consumers generally. They would just try the one they'd heard of, they'd use it or they wouldn't use it. And now I think what's happening is people have become familiar with enough models that I think there is low switching costs, and people are willing to try. If Gemini releases a new model, they'll try Gemini for a while. They'll use it as their daily driver for a while. And then if Anthropic releases a new model, they might go try that one for a while. And so I think there's very low switching costs. And so I think that, just to address the point about capital, the best companies in the world are public companies. And I think Anthropic sees this as a lane where they can step from the startup part of this race into maturing and growing as a public company. I think there's no difference between Anthropic's ability to raise and OpenAI's. I think they both have basically unlimited private capital raising opportunities. So I don't think there's really any differentiation there. But I think the decision to go public is more of adult in the room, which is exactly what you see in terms of style and presence from the way they release models. They don't do code reds. They do B2B focused heads down productivity work.
That would be atypical. It's certainly possible, but it would be atypical, meaning like Anthropic would be the best company in the last 10 years to electively decide to go public when they could just stay private. Like Stripe isn't public, right? SpaceX isn't public. There's an entire shoot.
I was just gonna say, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think like both OpenAI at some of their like public talks, OpenAI has also tendered the idea of like they're in conversations to consider an IPO late 2026, not in reaction to Anthropic sort of tendering the confirmation Wilson's the scene. They've discussed it as a potential option. I generally agree. I think with the idea of like, I think the statement of like where the LM labs are going is turning into like traditional business practices, like three people in the hoodie, like scrapping things together. Like it's becoming very professional, and the capital mechanisms of it matter a lot now. I think the thing that's different, I think, compared to before is a lot of these valuations are, so for example, like what Anthropic is, it sounds like they're tendering IPOing at like 500 billion.
Yeah,
right?
give or take. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so right now, I think at the end of this year, they're projecting 8 to 10 billion in revenue. So like they claim they've done 10x every year. Like this year, if they get 8, that'd be 8x. It probably trails a little bit. And their growth has been pretty good, all things considered. I mean, like their absorption with developers has been uniquely strong. And any one of these labs is doing these like custom enterprise consulting gigs. You know, that's the vast majority of their revenue. I think the way I look at it generally is they're still basing their valuations on a little bit of a really intense forward projection, at least OpenAI and Anthropic are. Gemini, different story, naturally. But both OpenAI and Anthropic are tendering this idea of like, oh, we need to get to the point that our data centers are able to like run self-recursive AI. You know, like our valuation is going to be based on the fact that we've generated a data center that's improving our models on their own. And I think you have to put that up to a little bit of like, yes, they're playing with capital, but their pitch for their valuation is based on the very theoretical scientific bet that's really capital intensive. Like it's a very, very risky claim generally. And Gemini's in a good spot. I mean, like Gemini, like they have all the distribution, like even my own usage, like what I do is like ChatGPT will generate like, even for this podcast, right? Like the thumbnails, when I need to edit them instead of going to Photoshop, I trust Gemini to do a pretty good job of editing photos. I don't trust ChatGPT to, right? But on this like idea of taste and what users end up indexing on, all this enterprise like competition, like all of these three companies are just vying for the exact same rules. I don't look at what they're able to offer to these companies as particularly unique. It's just that maybe in the ephemeral, who's the current winner of the benchmark, there might be some market power there, right? But even that changes like every couple of months. I don't look at Anthropic and OpenAI as uniquely different in that way. They just don't have the risk of like, there's not consumers on their app burning costs for them unnecessarily. And that also feels, for now, potentially ephemeral. If OpenAI can figure out new profit from the consumer, not new profit, but new revenue from the consumer lens. Right now, that code red was a step away from that. But they're a giant company, they're like 5,000 people. I kind of assume that they'll go back to that, hopefully, I think is part of what they'd have to do.
Yeah, it's interesting to see it play out. I mean, again, we'll see. I mean, I think if Anthropic prove successful down the IPO route, what's to stop OpenAI from just doing the same thing? Like, to me, it feels, the binary bet to me is incumbents versus emergence. That's why I'm having a hard time understanding why you would be bearish OpenAI and bullish Anthropic. They're both kind of winning down their particular lanes, but like Anthropic, as an example, almost 50% of their distribution comes from two companies, right? It's all of the code gen tools, Cursor being the largest, the Devons of the world being the other ones. And so if you cut off those, which those companies are trying to do, right? I mean, does Anthropic's B2B revenue get cut in half? I don't think so, but that's kind of the risk that you run in kind of having your distribution channel not owned by you, whereas OpenAI, for better or worse, their distribution channel is themselves. It is ChatGPT. So we'll see. In order for, I think in order for Anthropic to execute against the capital expenses they have projected to be spending, they need to raise at 4x their most recent valuation. And they've talked about raising a flat round if they do IPO. And we're just going off of kind of the Twitter reports. So, TBD on the accuracy of those. And in order for OpenAI to hit their capital expenses, they need to raise at 2x their last valuation. They raised roughly $500 billion. They need to raise roughly $200 billion at $1 trillion in the next round to kind of be able to execute against it. And that's assuming that they actually execute or complete those capital expenses. So I think time will tell. I mean, I think the sleeping giant is Google. And I think the bet to me is Google wins or, an emergent wins. And right now, the emergent in the pole position is OpenAI. So that seems to be the default bet. But yeah, again, we'll see.
On the topic of volatility and trying to predict things, Damon, you're, again, the person who's most plugged into this, but there was a little bit of news on someone making a lot of money off of prediction markets, if you'd like to set that up.
Yeah, so prediction markets we've talked about a couple of times on this pod, but basically they're an idea that you can trade or bet, depending on the terminology you prefer, on kind of outcomes in the future. Who's going to be the most popular streamed artist on Spotify? Who's going to win a Grammy? Who's going to win an election? Who's going to win the sports game tonight, right? The football game or the basketball game or otherwise. And there's a singular trader who has been, originally was a professional poker player, or at least his most recent profession was professional poker player, who has transitioned basically to full-time trader on Polymarket. And Polymarket or 60 Minutes rather, did a recent feature on Polymarket. Polymarket is getting ready for their debut in the US. Right now, they're not available in the US, other than select few on the wait list for their mobile app. And this trader has made roughly $3 million, 400 million in total volume over the past year or so, mostly just trying to uncover insights via standard research and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's the biggest trade profits that we've seen on these prediction markets. I think some of the debate would be around whether these prediction markets are here to stay or not. Both Kalshi and Polymarket, which are the biggest prediction markets, currently have raised in excess of 10 billion. Have raised in excess valuation over 10 billion in recent months. And so I think some of these questions break down to how much money is to be made here. Are these platforms here to stay? And kind of what's going to drive the economic incentive for the largest firms in the world to be there? I think it's a fascinating space. I mean, you've seen the recent partnerships with Kalshi and CNN. I think there's an entire tangent we could go down if we chose to speak about kind of the validity of prediction markets as information layers to help amplify the news and kind of how accurate things are being reported, maybe act as an important balance to what can be subjective biases for journalists or mainstream media or otherwise. But I think it's fascinating. Happy to dive down any of those branches.
You go, Shashi, you go.
Polymarket bought a company called QCEX to re-enter the US market in July of 2025. Polymarket has been illegal in the US, and they've sort of had this like crypto anarchist vibe. And so they're shedding that skin, and they're getting aggressive and growing in the US. They've raised $1 billion on an 11 billion valuation, if I recall. And just to summarize volumes, so the two biggest platforms, Polymarket and Kalshi, they hit 7.4 billion in betting volume in October. So that's to give you a rough size of kind of where the market is now, and it's rapidly growing. Sports betting is a big piece of this, as we know. And so the interesting thing in my mind is, how much do they turn into a competitor to the DraftKings of the world, and how much are they more broadly focused? We've seen them do, for example, political betting. That's been very common, betting on the outcomes of elections or betting on different smaller outcomes that are politically oriented. How much does this platform pivot toward becoming 90% perhaps sports betting, or will it be more broadly based?
So this is a question for you, Damon, because I'm outside of space and it's connected to what Shashi's asking for. I just don't understand it. What determines what you can bet on? Like, how do you end up with like, hey, like, could I go ahead and say like, in a hypothetical future, could I take a bet on like the weather in San Francisco? And if so, how would I start that? Right? Like, what am I legally allowed to start betting on, or what do the platforms allow you to do and not do?
Yeah. So I think some of this is unknown, but the way that it works currently is both of these platforms are either making markets themselves, right? So they would ideate the weather market in San Francisco as the example, or who's going to win the football game tonight, or who's going to win, again, top streaming artist on Spotify or otherwise. They also contract with third party providers of these things that are making the markets, setting initial odds, those kind of things, right? These are liquid market makers on all these platforms. So it comes from both. They also do have platforms in which customers or would-be users of the platforms can recommend, suggest markets as well. So I do think, depending on who you talk to, there is some vision of the world, especially on platforms that are not Kalshi and Polymarket, where we would be able to make a market anytime we wanted to, offer it up with initial odds on these platforms and allow people to bet on one side or the other of that. So yeah, to answer your question directly, I've got thoughts on sports and otherwise, but to answer the question directly, that's pretty much how I understand it currently.
How do you see the regulation of this? Because there's for example, like there's a Google engineer who bet on the outcome of whether Gemini 3 would be released early. And of course he had like insider info, but there's no rule that says, there's no rule presently in the platform or within Google, because this just hasn't been thought about enough to make rules on yet.
Yeah, it's the question, right? I mean, I think everybody's trying to explore it right now. I mean, the most likely scenario seems like commodities down the CFTC lane in the same way that you regulate. I mean, I think the debate honestly was sparked with crypto, right? Are cryptos commodities? Are they securities? I think it's the same kind of conversation that's going to happen around these swap contracts. There's an entire gray area right now with sweepstakes models in which a lot of these markets are kind of participating in. Kalshi is CFTC, whatever, regulated, approved, whatever you want to say. Polymarket, that's why they kind of bought the company that you alluded to earlier, Shashi. So right now everyone thinks it's going to be CFTC regulated in commodities. The one thing I would say, and as someone who's been exploring in this space, the one thing we've avoided are markets that seem ripe for insider manipulation or insider trading, or in which the outcome is not discrete, meaning there is some level of subjectivity to an outcome. So we've avoided all of those markets purposefully because we don't think the ecosystem currently exists for those markets to be kind of fair play, if you will, either for manipulation in that, in some respects, that Google search market kind of becomes a recursive mechanism, right? If all of a sudden the people that are mentioned on the Polymarket are topics of interest, their likelihood they're going to be Googled increases. So in a sense, you kind of create this positive feedback loop where you kind of get to run away with it. Obviously, there's other forms of manipulation. We saw this with a Coinbase earnings call in which the CEO of Coinbase was presented the mentioned markets on Polymarket and then speed run every single word on the markets in real time, right? So we simply, anybody that's trading in these spaces, it's early days of the stock markets, early days of commodities pools, early days of options. I would suggest extreme caution, and which, quite frankly, I think you're seeing most of the volume in sports, along with other reasons. But sports are well defined. They're credible for all that can be credible. I think they're still subject to some insider information, certainly, and maybe even some manipulation of the players themselves, and we can dive into that. But for all intents and purposes, we know who won the football game last night, right? There is no debate over who won. There's an actual scoreboard that everybody can agree upon. And so that's, in addition to being the highest frequency of the possible assets being traded on these platforms, that's the reason I think sports is kind of driving the largest volume right now.
Where do you think the largest volume ends up going? Like if you had to take a guess in 10 years?
I think day by day, it'll still be sports, just given the frequency, right? Like a presidential election happens once every 4 years. Every single day, there's numerous football and basketball and baseball and soccer and, games, etc. So I think it probably will always be a large part in sports, but I also think you'll start to see this other kind of layers being built in. There'll be peaks and valleys of political markets. Mentioned markets tends to be a pretty hot thing right now. And you're going to see these cyclical markets for other awards, whether that be Emmys, Grammys, these other kind of things. That's kind of how I see it shaping up.
I see. It's interesting. I think even talking with folks about prediction markets generally, a lot of people end up doing this reduction to this is sports betting and nothing else. I think you end up talking a lot about gambling and the ethics of that and where you end up landing. But I have a lot of really, I mean, I mentioned this before you even started the call and we didn't really have a full conversation about it. But a lot of conversation around the prediction markets, like especially folks who are really deep in it, like they look at it as like this is the future of like how you like do a little bit of journalism or how you report out information or how information spreads through anything. And like there are partnerships with CNN that like get passed around. Like there's like really tight relationships with like journalism like institutions that I don't generally understand. Like where are people in prediction markets wanting this thing to go? Like where is the energy pushing this thing towards, or like what's like the greater vision beyond like you can bet on anything? Because there seems to be like a greater calling to that a lot of people have to. I just don't get it.
Yeah, the best, again, we don't know, right? We're super early days, so we're all speculating here. But the way that I would answer that question is I would say there is potential for these prediction markets to become the new information layer that powers a lot of the most important decisions in the world. And what I mean by that is people get really, really serious when you ask them to start wagering on their opinions, right? People give more thought to it. They don't mislead like they can in surveys. They start to expose potential internal biases that people can exploit or bet against. And so what you get is you get this kind of maximally truth-seeking behavior in aggregate, not in a single entity, but in aggregate. And so what that propels, right, is how Polymarket was far more accurate in predicting that Trump was going to win the election last year than the polls were, right? And so you can just apply that phenomena across various information sources. And in the same ways that market kind of find truth because you have interested parties arguing their sides on both sides, that's kind of the utopian vision for this. I think there's still lots of questions around how it's going to be regulated. But, you know, when you ask people to bet on their opinions, they suddenly become much more careful about their actual opinions, right? And so you start to actually get to the root of what people really think when you start, you know, tethering dollars to them.
I see. Interesting. I mean, we can transition a little bit. Is there an active bet on what's happening with Netflix and Warner Brothers?
No, again, not that I'm aware of. That's outside of my world. So yeah, why don't you set the stage for that?
Okay. I am curious. I mean, for the folks who aren't aware, Warner Brothers Discovery has been in conversations to sell a big portion of their business. So I think Discovery is getting pulled away. That would be like CNN, TNT, but HBO Max, all the streaming content, all the properties under DC, like the video game media companies, whatever, are up for sale. And as of this morning, Netflix is in like exclusive, seem to be going forward, like a handshake has been made to acquire Warner Brothers effectively. The funniest thing to me, for folks who've seen Succession, this is very literally like the core plot of Succession, where like an upstart tech company ends up acquiring the old incumbent. They peel away their news and journalism layer, and it becomes this big regulatory deal. Mind you, this hasn't had regulatory approval or anything yet. This is literally news from today, December 5th, where Netflix, upstart little tech company that used to be just streaming out content, you know, 10 years, 15 years ago, is likely absorbing the company that owns like Harry Potter, DC Comics, or like DC's like media presence, Game of Thrones. All of that is being bundled up in Netflix, which made K-pop Demon Hunters. And it's crazy. It's crazy. I'm really doubtful this will get regulatory approval. Like it's way too much in my eyes, but like I've been surprised before. It's a crazy, crazy deal that's going on. Shashi, you immediately have reactions, I can see.
Yes, I love this. And this is we should do a Polymarket bet, the three of us. We should all bet on whether this gets regulatory approval, whatever amount you want. I think this is amazing for consumers, and I'll tell you why. Having the power of HBO with all of their legacy properties, to include Game of Thrones, having DC Comics and the superhero franchises and the Harry Potter franchises, movies and content involved in the most important platform now for viewing. Netflix is the go-to place where people go to view content now. It's undisputed at this point. Cable is a dying industry, and as most of its viewership is quite old, quite senior. I think this is amazing for Netflix. Netflix buying $83 billion worth of Warner Brothers Discovery and dropping off the stuff they don't want, CNN, TNT, is amazing. What I really hope they do is buy Comcast next. So Comcast has Universal Pictures. And what I want to do, here's what I want, Lakshya. I want to go to a theme park that is a Netflix theme park. I want to go on the Game of Thrones ride. I want to go on the Harry Potter ride. And I want to go on the DC Comics rides. And having that as a true competitor to Disney and Disney's content would be amazing for consumers. Universal Studios is already there. They just need to kind of throw their Netflix spin on it and throw in some Daenerys Targaryen Ride the Dragon ride.
I think so two things. I think The things that I'm most worried about with this deal is Warner Brothers has like they've had a pretty rough financial history for the last couple of years. They're carrying a lot of debt from the Discovery deal. They haven't had streaming growth of like as a consumer, speaking purely from like I'm sitting on my couch trying to watch something. The two streaming properties I rely on mostly are Netflix and HBO Max. Right over the years, like Netflix and HBO Max have just kept on bumping prices. And now with the consolidation of like, we basically only have Disney and we only have this Netflix singular entity, like the amount of price fairness for consumers is going to drop a lot inevitably. Like these things are going to get really, really expensive because they have the freedom to, which is why I'm doubtful that the regulatory approval happens. Like I think just like looking at consumer fairness, I think a lot of folks will be pretty skeptical. Like, congrats, your Netflix subscription is now 30, 40 something dollars because you're getting all these fantastic franchises and everything all bundled together. I also think filmmaking wise, Netflix is not the greatest. So I don't know how much they like let Warner Brothers keep their way of producing films. I would hope that they do because Warner Brothers does a really like this year, like Sinners was fantastic. Like all the DC properties were fantastic. If Netflix like does, I don't know if y'all saw Netflix release or this was leaked that Netflix had officially like sent out a description to their filmmakers saying like, we need you guys to be making TV shows and movies that release in Netflix with the specific goal that you should expect your viewers on your phone. So like elaborate every bit of dialogue as verbosely as possible, over explain everything. Because if you're a consumer on your watching Netflix, we assume you're distracted. So assume the user doesn't have a brain. Like assume there's no like clever, intelligent narrative to pick up whatever. That leaked like a year ago. And I would hate for that to come to a lot of the really quality stuff like that, like HBO Max produces, like The Last of Us. If that was the case there, I'd be losing my mind, to be honest. So I think I'm very, very doubtful on regulatory approval. I'm really, really skeptical that gets approval just purely from the consumer angle because it mean two consolidated, I guess, like major entities. Like I don't know if Disney owns ESPN or if they just have a partnership with them, but like Hulu, ESPN, Disney are all bundled. Max, like Netflix are all bundled. Like there's not a lot of competitive pricing opportunities for the layperson sort of thing.
Yeah, this to me is just another example of, for reasons that I can't perfectly articulate, that Netflix has just kind of run away with this consumer streaming in a way that I think will be studied forever. Maybe. I mean, Netflix is one of the only kind of consumer, quote unquote, companies that simply doesn't churn users. Even in times of economic downturn, they simply don't. And the other companies just have not been able to compete, whether that's Hulu or Disney Plus or HBO, HBO Max, then Max, now back to HBO Max, that kind of thing. And I think this is just kind of the evolution of market consolidation. Actually, it's interesting. I haven't given much thought to whether or not this would be approved. I think you make some compelling points. So I don't have much to add on that. On the specific point that you made about kind of the captivating or lack thereof of the actual media creation, I would say some of my favorite shows are Netflix creations, though, especially limited series. So like I kind of see them as almost both. They kind of do the mass market appeal of like maybe a TikTokification, for lack of a better word, of this content, but I also think they do some like really high quality stuff. I'm not necessarily like a media critic, or at least a well-informed one, so maybe I'm just kind of outside of the norm there. But I do wonder. Again, I don't have many thoughts other than just to say that I think it's interesting that you have kind of articulated that you're worried that the quality of what they make is going to go down here. Because like I guess Stranger Things, and there's been some other Netflix series that I thought were Bridgerton as an example. Queen's Gambit I really liked. There's a number of these kind of Netflix originals that I thought very highly of.
Squid Games.
Yeah, game's great. I think the one thing I'm most worried about. So like if this gets approved, whatever, it take like 12 or 18 months to like come through. And the one Warner Brothers property I need to not be touched is that second Batman movie. If they cancel that or if they change their plans of that, I will lose my shit. I probably have to censor saying that for the sake of posting, but if that movie gets upset in some shape, I'm going to lose it, dude. I can't have that upset. And the anticipated release date for that is October 2027. So even with like 12 to 18 months of regulatory approval, that thing could get hit really bad. And so I'm terrified.
It is interesting. I think there's another angle of this that we'll see how it plays out. But a lot of the expense of movie generation, I'm curious how that economic model shapes up. So we've basically seen these movie studios and show studios, Netflix included, kind of offshore from the US, a lot of the production of these things, simply because it's cheaper elsewhere, we've also got this kind of massive train coming down the track that is AI generated video and otherwise. I'm just very curious to see how all that influences these things.
Shashi, you have this childish grin on your face. You want to say something? I can see it.
I'll just say there will never be a Batman as good as Christian Bale. I'm sorry. I'm sure you're a fan of whatever young person you think is good. It's not. I'm sorry. It's not the case. Christian Bale will always be the best Batman. Batman Begins will always be the best Batman series. You're not going to convince me otherwise.
There are some opinions to be had. I know this is supposed to be like a professional, like tech, AI, whatever podcast, but we could spin it. We can do an off-season episode because that's a crazy sentence. that's crazy.
Christian Bale.
That's crazy. Cool. I guess we can wrap with something a little bit more fun. Y'all got your Spotify Wraps in? That happened this week. Very big deal, naturally. Shashi, what do you got on the queue?
I've got my Spotify Wrap. I know Damon doesn't do that kind of thing. He's very conservative with his Apple Music. Here's my Spotify Wrapped. Top artists. I got Imagine Dragons. I got the GOAT of rap, Lil Wayne. I got some Metro Boomin in there from the Spider-Man track.
I wasn't expecting you to have the Spider-Man track, but that is a very good one. I'll have a screenshot of mine. I have I think this is like a software engineer but I have guess how many minutes I had for this year?
40,000.
Damon?
No idea. 10,000.
Do you ever turn it off?
No, I just love music, man. There's this one artist I really like. You know how they give you, like, if you're a top fan or whatever, they'll tell you a percentage. There's one artist who got 16,000 minutes from me. I was a top 0.001% fan. And they gave me a special screen, which told me how, like, what my ranking was, like, what number I was. I was number 66, apparently, of their entire fan base. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. I mean, Damon, you're on Apple Music, but it is really fascinating. Like, just, I guess we can make this about tech and consumers. Whatever I don't know who came up with Spotify Wrapped many years ago. Genius. Like, absolutely genius, right?
Yep.
Like, it is, I don't think there's any company that's like come close to creating so much of a cultural moment around their brand. You know, like, so uniquely strong that, like, when we talk about Netflix, wherever, like, even YouTube did like a YouTube Wrap this year, and mine was awful. It just told me how many Breaking Bad clips I watched. And it was so boring and like debranded and flat. Whereas Spotify Wrapped has managed to turn like almost like a thing that people look forward to, like a national holiday, which is crazy.
Yeah.
That like any consumer founder should be dreaming of. Sam Altman should be dreaming of.
Yeah. And it's across generations. My older son, he's been competing for the entire year to beat his friends in. There's this song that's sort of like a meme song. It's called Thick of It by KSI.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like an inside joke, but the kids are all like listening to it to compete to see who can get higher on their Spotify Wrapped. So they've been doing this for an entire year. Last year, he started this at the Spotify Wrapped. He's like, hey guys, I'm going to beat you at this. And I think he's in like the top 50 in the world in like listening to this one song, Thick of It.
That's funny. I will say, so I think Spotify is miles better than Apple Music. I will say there's a couple of reasons why I'm on Apple Music, but I think just number one, I don't listen to that much music. Like, most of my listening is podcasts or similar. And so like I spend far more time on YouTube than I spend on any other platform. So like I would like a YouTube Wrap. I know they kind of do a similar thing, but to your point, like Spotify just seems to have nailed this in a way that other platforms simply can't. Like, I was just looking at my Apple thing. I basically had somewhere around like 6,000 hours of music, I think, all year. To your, whatever you said, Lakshya, 116.
6,000 hours or minutes?
Minutes. Sorry, minutes.
Okay. Yeah. I was about to say, that's a lot
minutes,
of minutes.
Yeah, minutes. Yeah. Yeah. Most of the time that I spend listening to music is like on shared car rides. So it's like when I can't listen to the thing that I would ultimately like to be listening to because my wife or other people are in the car. So
I see. Well, in that case, though, what podcasts or audiobooks have earned a lot of your love this year?
That's a good question. All my audiobooks are like self-help or some version thereof, like some sort of like, case study, kind of dry, nonfiction. I wouldn't necessarily highly recommend those. The thing that I will recommend, just in a specific call out, is the Acquired podcast on YouTube. They do a really good job. They take like 4 hours. They publish like once a month. They go through kind of the entire history, at least in the various Cliff Notes versions of a company. Like the most recent one I listened to was on a history of Coca-Cola. And so they go through like the various stages of that company. They kind of outline the history of that, and they just do a really, really good job. So that's the one that I would say I most look forward to listening to. The actual one that gets the most hours or minutes of listening is all like sports talk radio, or what used to be sports talk radio is now just like some version of a sports talk show.
I see. I drove up and down. So I'm from Portland, Oregon. I live in SF, but for the holidays, I drove up. And so obviously I needed something to listen to. I don't listen to that many podcasts or audiobooks generally, but on the drive up, I listened to, it's just called Founders. The name of it. It's pretty similar to Acquired, I think, tone wise. Fantastic. All this guy does is that he just like reads and studies like all the documentation, biographies, autobiographies that are written about certain founders, and just kind of aggregates it into like 1 hour chunk or segment. So he covers Elon a lot, covers Jobs a lot, but there's also a lot of like unpopular sort of founders, or like they're known in common media, but they don't get that much attention. Like talking about the Raising Cane's founder, like the episode that I landed on that introduced me to the podcast was the one about the Trader Joe's founder.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just really, really well told stories. Like I think especially for folks who are listening who are founders, it's just really great to like hear people who were successful. And this guy will like, again, you're listening to like things filtered many, many times over, but there's like a couple of like core lessons that come across every single founder that you can kind of take away from like who you want inspiration from, who's like worth kind of modeling based on the way you look at the world. But there's some really, really great stuff in there. If folks haven't listened to that. Cool. I guess we'll wrap there for the day. We'll catch y'all probably next week. I think we'll try to be consistent, but if not, happy holidays. We'll catch y'all soon. I have the Matic robot arrived. It's just in Portland.
Ooh.
So I'll be able
Alright.
to demo that hopefully over the Christmas holiday. So we'll do hopefully some kind of cool episode.
We'll do a show and tell episode. We'll show
Yeah.
off our favorite new toy.
Yeah. Cool. Catch y'all later. Thanks y'all for
See you guys.
listening. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace.